welcome back to the channel. So as a storage unit buyer, this article kind of hit home. You deal with a lot of this stuff when you clean out a storage unit. This one is titled 17 Inherited Items That No One Actually Wants to Deal With. It's a great idea to think ahead and consider which items you will leave to your loved ones when you pass, but don't get carried away. Sometimes the things that we inherit can actually be a nuisance, often because the item is bulky or completely disconnected from our lives. It's always best to discuss inheritance with your loved ones to figure out what they'd like, but as a general rule of thumb, no one actually wants to deal with the following inherited items. First on the list are china cabinets. Back in the old days, this might have made for an incredible heirloom, but today, not so much. China cabinets are large and awkward, and they're just no longer part of how most people live or decorate. Sadly, even fine china probably isn't going to be appreciated in the same way that it once was. Next on the list are boxes of old photographs. You definitely shouldn't start throwing away your stacks of old photographs, as there's no denying they're historic and nostalgic. However, it can be pretty overwhelming for a relative to sort through, especially a younger one who is used to digital photography. We'd recommend scanning the photographs into your computer so that they're archived in a future way. Then ask your loved ones if they'd like the originals, but don't just dump them on them. Up next on the list is figurine collections. Perhaps you collected porcelain animals or action figures throughout your life. Regardless of your preference, remember that these collections won't necessarily match the taste of your relatives or friends. They'll feel an uncomfortable pressure to display them, and selling them may be nearly impossible. So overall, they just become a nuisance. Next on the list is vintage clothing. Ask yourself, what on earth do you expect your younger family members to do with your old dresses or suits? Sure, they're nostalgic, but they're also musty and out of fashion, and they most likely won't fit the recipient. Personally, we just donate them to charity shop so that somebody can get genuine use from these vintage clothes. Up next are sets of silverware. As with fine china, inherited silverware can feel pretty useless these days because most people tend to stick to modest sets from IKEA rather than their fancy heirlooms. To make matters worse, the age of silverware sets tends to mean that they come with missing forks or knives, so you should probably give this a miss from your will. Up next are old tools. It can be tempting to pass down old tools to your loved ones, as it's a nice thought that they'll carry a practical purpose for generations to come. Realistically though, heavy and rusted tools are just going to gather dust, rattling around in wooden boxes and stinking like motor oil. Up next on the list are cookbooks from the 1950s. Most American families have a cookbook from the 50s or 60s filled with old-fashioned recipes. They're truly loved artifacts, but honestly, they rarely get used as the meals contained are pretty out of date. We certainly wouldn't recommend throwing them away, but instead consider donating them. If you're worried about your family or friends missing out, consider scanning and digitizing them first. Up next on the list are unfinished craft projects. Be honest, do you really think that your children are going to finish off grandma's half-knitted sweater or their uncle's nearly built model ship? Unlikely. Projects like this come with a strange emotional weight because it feels disrespectful to toss them while also being totally unappealing to finish. Just admit defeat and toss it out. Up next are stamp collections. Decades ago, stamp collecting was a proud hobby, but it's rare to see a collection that isn't gathering dust anymore. People just aren't that interested in stamps anymore, so instead of leaving it to a loved one who may not appreciate it, consider leaving it to a member of your local stamp collecting community. Next on the list is furniture that doesn't fit. We understand that you want to pass on that elegant but enormous Victorian armchair or dining table, but take a moment to ask yourself, is the recipient actually going to be thankful for this? More than likely, it's going to take up valuable space only to sit where they're gathering dust. Personally, we'd consider donating it to a furniture store unless someone shows an active interest in it. Up next on the list are old Bibles or religious books. If your family is religious, you've probably thought about passing on your old Bibles or religious texts when you pass. That could be a kind gesture if the recipient is religious too, but bear in mind that such texts are delicate and often outdated. Yes, throwing them out seems wrong, but keeping them often feels just as confusing. Up next on the list are assorted keys. Why on earth do people leave their families with tins of rusty, mismatched keys? It's by far one of the most bizarre things to inherit, and they're never labeled, and they probably open locks that no longer exist. Sure, it might add some mystery to the recipient's life, but come on. Up next is paperwork. When it comes to old bank statements and receipts, it can be hard to tell what matters and what doesn't. Some of it feels like history, whereas most of it is junk, especially considering that hardly anyone uses paperwork these days. Our recommendation, have it read through it all, toss it out anything that isn't important, and for anything questionable, scan it into your computer and throw away the paper copy. Up next is taxidermy. Even the most lovingly preserved animal head or bird under glass tends to make people uncomfortable, and it should be easy to see why. Once upon a time, these objects were meant to impress or celebrate it, but in most homes, they just feel creepy. Furthermore, they're hard to sell, so normally they end up in basements or wrapped in towels in the garage. Up next on the list are Hummel figurines or decorative plates. A lot of Americans seem to inherit an entire shelf of these, usually displayed proudly by their grandparents. However, few younger folks have the desire or shelf space to carry on the tradition. Sadly, these items were often mass-produced too, so they're really not as valuable or unique as we may have thought at the time. Up next are paintings of unknown people. Sometimes paintings can make for lovely heirlooms, but oil portraits of stern-looking strangers? There's something haunting about receiving that. Nobody knows who they are anymore, and that mystery adds to the unease. However, no one wants to toss them either, so they're just gathered dust in the basement. And finally on the list is military memorabilia. The final inherited item on this list that no one wants to deal with is dog tags, medals, and any other kind of military memorabilia. For sure, all of this stuff comes steeped in meaning and memory, but unless you have a connection to that part of family history, it's hard to know what to do with it. Some people still have a fascination with the military, so it's worth asking around. If no one shows any interest though, it may be best to donate. Alright, there you have it, 17 inherited items that no one actually wants to deal with. I probably agree with about half of this list. Some of the stuff on the list is quite sought after online still. Vintage clothing, Bibles always sell online, cookbooks, vintage cookbooks, there's a huge demand for cookbooks online. So there's stuff you can sell. Military stuff still does well online as well. You can always bulk it up and sell the entire lot to make it easier on yourself if you don't want to sell individual items, but some of this stuff, yeah, furniture, all that stuff, taxidermy has some value, but tough to sell that stuff. But some of this stuff you can sell, and others nobody wants to deal with. 17 inherited items that no one actually wants to deal with. I agree with about half the list. Get in the comment section and let me know how you feel about it. Which of these items would you like to receive, and which would you not want to get? For example, an unfinished craft project. If you're a crafty person, you get grandma's craft project. It might be right down your alley, but for me, yeah, I probably wouldn't want something like that. Of course, inheriting Grandpa's old toolbox with all those vintage tools. Sure, they might smell like oil and stink up the garage a little, but it's kind of a nice little conversation piece. Nice to have a few tools sitting around that you may need somewhere down the line, so I wouldn't mind getting something like that. Figurine collections, a lot of resellers do move this stuff online, but usually if it's coming from a storage unit, there's broken pieces, and that stuff never sells. So figurine collections, I'd definitely pass on that stuff. But let me know how you feel about it. Get in that comment section and leave me a comment on what you wouldn't mind dealing with and what you don't want to deal with. And as always, if you enjoyed today's video, please take a second to hit that big thumbs up like button. That'll help get in front of a few more eyes. And if you really enjoy this sort of content, consider subscribing to the channel. We got fresh videos coming to you daily. I try to post 2 to 3 videos a day, so there's always something fun and fresh for you to watch and listen to. I thank you for watching this one to the very end. I'm Brian Kingsbury. We'll talk to you on the next one. Bye.